Yeah, thank you, Cian Corlin. Thank you for selecting this issue under topical issues. My interest, Cian Corlin, this was born out of the frustration I felt when I got a response to a parliamentary question recently confirming that there are currently no plans for the development of a national autism strategy or for introducing specific legislation on autism. Such a statement, in my view, Cian Corlin, is disappointing given the increasing prevalence of autism in Ireland and the fact that the Department's stance on it is widely out of sync with international standards. In this context, I am appealing to the Minister to review the position and consider taking a different approach based on the arguments that I will outline in a few moments. For the purposes of context, let us look briefly to the USA, where the number of children being diagnosed with autism has doubled in the past decade. There are no equivalent figures yet in Ireland, but an estimated 600 children are born here every year with that condition, and the figure is rising. It is hard to determine whether the increase can be attributed to an actual rise in the incidence of autism, improvements in our diagnostic tools, or greater access to psychological services. What is in no doubt, however, Cian Corlin, is that autism has dramatically risen in Ireland in recent years. At present, Ireland is the only country within the British Isles which doesn't have autism-specific laws or a national autism strategy in place. In 2008, the Welsh Assembly Government issued an autism strategy and began implementing it immediately. In 2009, the House of Commons brought the Autism Act 2009 into force and quickly proceeded the following year by its strategy for adults with autism. In 2011, the Scottish Government launched their national autism strategy, and the same year the Autism Act for Northern Ireland was passed. It compels the powers to publish its autism strategy within 2 years of the Act being passed. There has been a general move in recent years to implement autism-specific strategies in many Western democracies. As the aforementioned examples clearly illustrate, this move has been prompted by the increasing prevalence of autism, the soaring cost of providing autism services, a squeeze on resources, and the need to prioritise such resources effectively. Minister, there are many lessons to be learned from our counterparts in the British Isles. The Scottish Autism Strategy Bill, for example, places a statutory duty on government to prepare and publish a strategy to meet the needs of children and adults with autism, to consult with appropriate organisations and people, while it would also oblige local authorities and local health boards to comply on the provision of diagnostic services, the identification of children and adults with autism locally, the assessment of their needs, the planning and provision of services, the training of staff and leadership at local level. As I have already stated, some 600 children are born in Ireland every year with autistic spectrum disorder. However, these are merely approximate figures, as the absence of a national autism strategy leads to an abject absence of prevalence rates. This naturally has huge implications for the provision of services nationally, and without access to a reliable bank of statistics in this area, it is difficult for service providers to know what policies and guidelines should be put in place for future planning of services. Of course, behind the figures are real individuals and real households and real families who are struggling with this condition. Autism spectrum disorder is a complex and lifelong developmental condition, and while some people can live relatively independent lives, others have high dependency needs and require specialist care. Autism to this day presents a significant public health challenge. Until such time as we have a national autism strategy in place in this country, there will be an ongoing cost to society of the resources that we waste. As long as services fail to be properly targeted, ineffectiveness and waste will continue, and we will fail to equip people with autism with the right supports that ultimately enable them to lead independent and productive lives. Borrowing from that UK example, components of a national strategy could include a national autism programme board, similar to the one that already exists in the United Kingdom, a programme to develop training with health and social care professional bodies, autism awareness training for those working with people with autism, guidance on making public services available for adults with autism, like improving buildings, public transport and indeed communications. In conclusion, Cian Corlin, the latter point has already been addressed in the HSE National Review of Autism Services, which was published in February, and it undertook to do a review of existing services and aimed to identify pathways on how services can be accessed and delivered.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Cian Corlin, and I'd like to thank the Deputy for raising this issue. As he rightly says, it's one that is increasing and that we do need to take account of. And I wish to thank Deputy McCarthy for raising this matter. Autism spectrum disorder, ASD, is a complex neurodevelopmental condition that not only affects approximately 1 in every 100 citizens in Europe, but also impacts on their families and society at large. Policy in this area aims to enable people with complex disabilities, including those with autism, to live as independently as possible within the community. The Irish Government is committed to providing specialist disability supports to enable each individual with a disability, including those with autism spectrum disorder, to achieve his or her full potential and maximise independence, including living as independently as possible. The management and delivery services related to autism is the responsibility of the HSE under the Health Act 2004 to provide services for individuals with autism spectrum disorder from childhood to adulthood, either directly or indirectly by both statutory and non-statutory service providers. Services are provided in a variety of community and residential settings in partnership with service users, their families, carers, and a range of statutory and non-statutory voluntary and community groups. It is worth noting that a number of departments have responsibility for the provision of services to people with autism. The Department of Health is responsible for health-related aspects, and the Department of Education and Skills has responsibility for educational aspects. The Department of Children and Youth Affairs also has a role in relation to services for children. In recognition of the cross-departmental issues arising on autism, a principal officer has now been appointed in the Department of Health to promote a coordinated approach to the needs of children, adolescents and young people with complex disabilities, including autism. The Health Service Executive published a National Review of Autism Services in February this year. The National Review of Autism Services outlines the historical background, the current models that exist, the gaps in the service provision, and the need for a consistent, clear pathway for individuals to access services in the least restrictive way. The report highlights the imperative for a clear focus on the individual and their families in ensuring that the needs of the individual remain at the centre of service provision. It is intended that future provision of services for children and adults with autism will be developed, having regard to the Government's commitment to mainstreaming, to enable people with a disability have access to the same service as the general population, and in addition receive the appropriate supports and interventions to address individual needs. There are no plans currently under consideration in the Department of Health for the development of a national autism strategy or for introducing specific legislation on autism. The recommendation of the National Review of Autism Service report will be implemented through the reconfiguration of existing service provision and having regard to the most effective and efficient use of resources available in the current economic climate. The Department of Health's forthcoming value for money and policy review of disability services will set the wider context for achieving a person-centred disability service overall. And once again, I do thank the Deputy.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Ciaran identifying the cause and finding the cure to autism is still elusive, unfortunately, to the medical profession. But in the meantime, the best approach, I believe, is autism-specific education and early intervention so that people with the disorder can live fulfilling lives culturally, socially, economically and spiritually. Now, I welcome the Minister's recent pledge to invest €2 million in additional funding for early detection and treatment services over the next 2 years. Might I suggest that in order to ensure this investment is effectively utilised, that a national autism strategy is developed and implemented. There's a huge opportunity here as well, Ciaran, in the context of our presidency of the European Union in 2013, to make autism an EU priority from a policy point of view. Many challenges exist at EU level in relation to autism. I think we have a glorious opportunity to put that at the centre of the agenda of our presidency. For too long, people with autism have been falling between the cracks of an overweight system, and as a result, many have led lives that aren't as fulfilled as they actually could be. And I don't think it is acceptable any longer. I think a national strategy provided for by legislation would not only transform services, but would change attitudes across society. And I think, Minister, you've shown and demonstrated great bottle and great passion for your briefs in the Department of Health, and I genuinely believe this is another area in which we can be, and not because it's being seen to be doing the right thing, it's because it is the right thing to do for people, unfortunately, who suffer from this condition. Thank you, Ciaran.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. And Deputy, it's just that right now it's not under consideration. It's not been ruled out, it's not been ruled in, and there have been additional resources put in because of the recognition that autism has become more prevalent. And as you said yourself, whether that's in relation to more clearer diagnosis or whether the incidence of autism is increasing. It's difficult to know. I think as well what we do need to do, seriously need to do, is start gathering the type of data that we have, for instance, in relation to other disabilities. And I know that there is a whole discussion needs to go on around, is autism a disability or is it not? But in terms of how we gather that type of information, I think needs to happen. It's been suggested to me, for instance, that an additional question in the census might be of help, and we need to take a look at that, because we cannot plan unless we have the type of data and information that we need in order to be very clear about where that money needs to go. But there is one issue that I think we need to be very clear about. There's going to be an additional 3 million put into early detection and early treatment in relation to autism over the next 3 years. And what has happened in other areas of disability is that despite sometimes additional funding being put in, there is no sustainable service put in place. And we need to ensure that when money is put in to develop a service, that it is a sustainable service. And I think more than anything else with autism, because structure and the need to know exactly what's happening is very important to not just the people affected by it, but indeed our families. So hopefully that we will ensure that gathering the information and putting a sustainable structure in place will in fact lead to a better service for everyone.
Thank you, Minister.